Thinking about them, I got lonesome and went in and woke Johnny up. We stayed awake the rest of the night, talking about all the different big outfits we could work for. It would be the JAs most likely, or maybe the Matadors, depending on where we decided to go from Amarillo. We had about $15 apiece cash money and our saddles and saddle blankets, so we felt pretty well off. We got off the train at the big brick station in Amarillo, and it was like getting off at the North Pole. The wind whistles down those big streets like the town belonged to it, and the people were just renters it was letting stay. God damn, Johnny said, I never realized it was this cold up north in the winter time. We got a hotel room and decided to take the day to look around. Only the hotel room was so toasty and warm, we stretched out and slept till almost 6 o'clock. When we went outside, the lights were on and the streets were plumb empty, like the wind had blown everybody away. We found some saloons, though, and the people were in them. Let's celebrate before we go to work, I said. He was agreeable, and boy did we celebrate. I wished we'd eaten supper first. I guess around home we never drank enough to keep in shape. We found some girls, too, even if they wasn't no raving beauties. We would have kept them for the night, but they said our hotel was too respectable for them. They wouldn't take us to their places, so we went back to the saloons and drank some more and did without. When we finally got back to the room, we agreed we'd have to get up at 4 o'clock and look for a job. Boy, it was a bad night. If the hotel hadn't had a bathtub, we would have ruined the place. I brought up a good gallon myself before morning, and I wasn't nothing to Johnny. He made twice as many trips as I did. About the time it got light, I seen him on his way to the bathroom again, only he was crawling. What are you doing crawling, I said. Can't you even walk? I might could, he said, and crawled on in anyway. I thought that was pretty funny. Hell, I can at least walk, I said. He was in asleep on the bathroom floor. We never made it up at 4, but we did get downstairs by about 6:30. I had got emptied out and was feeling okay, but Johnny wasn't. I made him eat some breakfast, though, and he kept it down. That'll make you good as new, I said. I'll never be that good again, he said. By the time we got our hotel bills paid, it was after sunup. The wind was still cold as ice. How much money you got, I said. Oh, a few dollars, he said, enough to last. But by God, when we counted, we had $3 between us. Where the rest of it went, I'll never know. We better go to Clarendon, he said. That's the place to get jobs. Hell, we'll be broke by supper. So we got railroad tickets to Clarendon. They cost $1 apiece. Johnny went to sleep right off, but I sat up and looked out the window. That old plains country sure did look cold and gray to me, and I wasn't so sure I liked it. We ought to have waited till springtime to leave home. But still, it was a good feeling to be loose like we were. It was a kind of adventure in a way, and it didn't too much matter about the cold. It mattered more about Molly and Dad. I was just glad Johnny was along. It wouldn't have been much fun by myself. I couldn't figure out what had happened to all our money. They put us off in Clarendon about 1 o'clock. Johnny was all refreshed, and we turned up our collars and went walking down the street to see the town. It would have been a nice walk if it hadn't been for carrying the saddles. I guess we were lucky. The first thing we struck was a horse auction. They were auctioning off a couple of hundred broncs some fellas had driven in from New Mexico. A lot of cattlemen were there. After we watched the bidding a while, we saw a funny-looking old man who didn't look like he could be very important, so we asked him if he knew where 2 cowpunchers could get a job. He was pretty friendly. You boys cowpunchers, he said. What else can you do? Can either one of you ride broncs? He was a grizzly old feller and didn't have but half an ear on one side of his head. Both of us can, Johnny said, which was a damn lie. He couldn't ride a bronc if all 4 of its feet were hobbled. He was an awful good hand on a horse, but he wasn't no hand to make a horse, so I contradicted him. I can ride broncs, and he can do everything else, I said. My name's Grinsom, he said. I could use a couple of hands myself. I'm going to have a bunch of horses to drive home when this is over, and then somebody's going to have to break them. I damn sure ain't. You boys come along, and I'll try you for a week. I'll give you $1 apiece to give these broncs a good ride, and if we get along with one another, it'll be $15 a month and bunk and board. That suit you? It didn't seem no great amount of money to me, and I couldn't figure a little dried-up feller like Mr. Grinsom owning much of a ranch. But Johnny thought it was fine, so we hired on. It turned out Mr. Grinsom owned 38,000 acres. He bought 19 broncs and offered me and Johnny our pick of them to ride to the ranch. Since Johnny had spoke up about being a bronc rider, that was pretty funny. He got throwed 4 times on the way to the ranch. I only got thrown once, and that was an accident. I was looking around and not paying enough attention to what I was doing. "You ain't gonna break no broncs that way," Mr. Grinsom said to him after the 4th buck off. Johnny was about half crippled by then and too mad to lie. "Hell no, I ain't no damn bronc rider," he said. "Gid can break these horses. He likes that kind of stuff. I'm a cowboy. I like to ride a horse that already knows something so I can get work done. You keep me a week, and if I don't turn out to be the best hand you got by then, why, by God, just fire me." Mr. Grinsom got tickled. He had pretty much of a sense of humor, at least about some things. "My boys may give you a little competition," he said. It turned out he really meant his boys, too. He had a big, fat, good-natured wife and 7 grown sons. He had 2 hired hands, too, but he never worked them half as hard as he worked his own boys. All the boys' names started with J. Jimmy, Johnny, Jerry, Joe, Jakey, Jay, and Jordman. I never could tell them apart, but they were nice enough old boys. They had a great big bunkhouse, and me and Johnny and the 2 hired hands and the 7 boys all slept in it. We ate supper at the big house, and Mrs. Grinsom explained to us that after they'd had the 4th boy, it had got too noisy in the house, and they'd put them out in the bunkhouse with the cowboys when they got big enough to get around. I don't know where all the noise went. The only words I ever heard them say were, "Thank you for the supper, Mama. It sure was good." Each one of them said that to Mrs. Grinsom after their meals. Me and Johnny thought it was a pretty strange family, but the other 2 cowboys, one's name was Ed and the other's name was Malonis, they really thought so. They were so glad to have new hands around that wasn't in the family that they just about hugged us. The next morning, the old man asked me if I really wanted to break the horses. I said for $1 apiece, like he offered, I'd give them a good ride. "How many do you want to ride a day?" he said. "Oh, I ought to be done with them by 3 o'clock, I said. "There ain't but 18 left. I rode one yesterday." He acted like he didn't believe me. He sent Johnny off with the boys and the other hands and stayed around the lots all day, doing little chores and watching me out of the corner of his eye. I didn't care. I felt real good that morning. The cold didn't even bother me. I made a good strong hackamore and went after them broncs. By dinner time, I only liked 6 being done with them, and I got the 6 in another 3 hours. I even saddled up a few of the worst ones and rode them again, just so the old man would really get his money's worth. By that time, he was sitting on the fence. I bet he chewed a whole plug of tobacco that afternoon. When I got done and turned them out in the horse pasture, he walked off to the house without saying a word. But I didn't care about that either. I had been throwed 7 times and was stiff and sore as hell. But I felt like $1,000,000. I felt like I could have ridden 50 horses if I'd just had somebody to do the saddling for me. That night the old man did a strange thing. He paid me at the supper table. "By God," he said after supper, "now, Mother, make these boys be quiet." None of the boys had made a sound anyway. "I want you all to notice," he said, "this here's one feller that can do the job. He rode 18 wild horses today. I seen him myself, and one yesterday." I was real embarrassed. The old man got up and stomped off to the bedroom and came back jiggling a sack full of money. "I'll pay you right here," he said. "It might put some ambition into these boys of mine." And he counted me out $19, mostly in silver money. There wasn't a sound in the room but the money clinking. Even after I gathered it up and put it in my pockets, there still wasn't a sound. Later that night, Ed told me the old man never paid the boys at all, just give them $1 apiece at Christmas time. That didn't surprise me much. Mr. Grinsom wasn't the first tight feller I'd ever seen. We worked pretty good for about a week. Me and Johnny never had no trouble matching the other hands. By the time the week was over, Johnny wasn't in no danger of getting fired. The old man was funny. He treated us like friends and his own boys like hound dogs. But there were 2 things I couldn't get over. One was making $19 in one day, and the other was being homesick. If I could make $19 in one day, I was stupid to work a whole month for 15. And besides, I remembered the time in Fort Worth when I'd made $400 in about 2 hours. Cowboying was fun, but it wasn't near enough fun to make $15 a month worthwhile. I knew I could beat that. The homesickness was the worst part of it, though. I didn't mind the work, and I didn't mind the company. I didn't mind the country or even the cold weather. I just minded feeling like I wasn't where I belonged. Home was where I belonged, but tell that to Johnny and he would have laughed like hell. He didn't feel like he belonged to any certain place, and I did. He was born not 5 miles from where I was, too. When you came right down to it, Dad was right. Me and him was a lot different. I couldn't get over thinking about Dad and Molly and the country and the ranch, the things I knew, the things that were mine. It wasn't that I liked being in Archer County so much. Sometimes I hated it. But I was just tied up with it. Whatever happened there was happening to me, even if I wasn't there to see it. The country might not be very nice, and the people might be ornery, but it was my country and my people, and no other country was. No other people either. You do better stay in with what's your own, even if it's hard. Johnny carried his with him. I didn't. If you don't stick with a place, you don't have it very long. Me and Johnny argued for 10 days. I just plain wanted to go back, and he just plain didn't. I got so I couldn't sleep. I would wake up and lie awake for hours. Then one Saturday, Johnny was in Clarendon and run into a man who had a ranch out near the New Mexico line. He wanted a cowboy or two to look after it through the winter. It was so dull he couldn't stand the winter there himself. He offered double what we were getting and said besides he had a pretty little Indian woman who would stay out and do the cooking. So Johnny hired on for both of us, but he told the man we had 2 more weeks to go for Grinsom. I told him right off I wasn't going any farther west or north, but he thought I'd changed my mind. Then on a Tuesday, Mr. Grinsom sent us out in one of his big pastures to look for sicklings. That was all he had for us to do, and I just decided I was through. I pulled up and stopped. Hell with it, I said. I'm going to Archer County. There ain't no use in me loafing around here any longer. We turned our backs to the wind and watched it whipping across the high, open flats. He tried to talk me out of it. Don't do nothing rash, he said. Wait till we get on the new job. Think of that Indian woman. You go on out there, I said. I don't want to spend no winter in New Mexico. What would I want with an Indian woman when Molly's just 3 miles from home? Yes, but Molly's crazy, he said. I never stopped to argue, I said. You coming or staying? He hunched his neck down into his collar and frowned. I hate to see you miss a good winter, he said. What'll I do for company if that woman don't talk English? But he was staying. There ain't as much at home for me as there is for you, he said. This here's more the life for me. And I was crazy enough to want to stay with him, even when I knew I was going home. We were pretty good buddies. Well, I hate to run off and leave you, I said, but I got to go. You'll be coming home next summer, won't you? Oh, sure, he said. I just don't feel like going that direction right now, Gid. I hate to be stuck off out here with no company, though. Well, write me once in a while, I said. I believe I'll lope on back. I might could get to Amarillo tonight. Say hello to the country for me, he said. Give old Molly a big kiss and tell her she's still my girl. I'll sure do it, I said. Don't let no crazy horse fall on you. Oh, hell, he said. Won't nothing hurt me unless I freeze to death. You watch out yourself. I guess we should have shook hands, but we never. He kind of nodded and turned and tucked his head down and trotted off into the wind, headed north. I sat there a minute, watching him cross the windy pasture. Then I loped back to the ranch, gave notice, and talked the old man into loaning me a horse to ride to Clarendon. Why you running off, he said. Too dull? I may buy some more broncs in a week or two. Oh, no, I said. I just guess I'll go run my own ranch. It was a pretty lonesome trip home. I had to wait till way after dark for a train out of Clarendon, and was the only one on it then, so I didn't have a soul to talk to. I never slept a wink all night. I was too excited about going home. Only I wished old Johnny had come. Train riding was dull without him. I got off in Wichita Falls about 10 the next morning and found a man with a wagon going to Thalia. We drove in about an hour before dark, and the first person I saw was Mabel Peters coming out of the dry goods store where she worked. Why, if it ain't Gid, she said. She had put on a little flesh and was dressed nice and looked real cheerful. In spite of all I could do, she made me go home and have supper with her at the boarding house. All the boarders were there, so she didn't dare ask me up to her room, but she followed me out on the porch after supper and hung on to me for an hour. She was so glad to see me. She asked me 4 or 5 times if I would come back and see her. It was so late when I left Mabel that I had trouble finding anybody to borrow a horse from, but I finally got one and rode home. I was practically sick at my stomach. I was so glad to be going home. It was good to ride over some familiar country. I even went by Molly's, but there wasn't no light. I sat on my horse by the back fence a minute, thinking about her. Our place was dark, too. When I got in, the first thing I did was tiptoe down the hall to Dad's door to listen a minute. He was snoring like he always did. Once I heard him cough and hark. I was glad he was asleep. I guess I was afraid I would find him out in the moonlight plowing that old oat field. Chapter 14. The morning after I got home, I remember Dad came in my room real early, but he never woke me up. I was about half awake, and I seen him standing inside the door, but I guess he figured I needed the rest because he went on out and I stayed in bed till 9 o'clock. When I finally got dressed and outside, he was down at the lots filling up the hay racks. It was a cold morning with a big frost on the ground. "Well, how's the panhandle?" he said. "I guess you got rich quicker than I thought you would, or else you went broke quicker. Which was it?" "Oh, I just got homesick," I said. "How's everything here?" "Run down and wore out," he said, "especially me. Why don't you get the horses up? A couple of them need their shoes pulled off, and I ain't had the energy." Dad sure looked bad. He hadn't hired no help at all. I knew he wouldn't. But he wasn't lying when he said he was worn out. He didn't have much flesh on him anymore, and he had been a big fleshy man. When I first got home, I thought it was from working too hard, but it wasn't. He was just sick. He didn't have no wind anymore, nor much grip in his hands. But he wouldn't go to a doctor for love nor money. I felt real bad about having gone off and left him so long. I know it wouldn't have made any difference to his health if I had stayed, but it would have made some difference to me. "Hell, you ought to go see a doctor, Dad," I told him. "You probably just need some kind of pep-up medicine. Why do you want to be so contrary?" "I ain't contrary," he said. "I just don't want to pay no doctor to tell me what I already know. There ain't no medicine for old age." "You're just tight," I said. "You oughtn't to let a few dollars stand between you and your health." "I am tight," he said. "I'm rich, too." "You don't live like it," I said. "No, because I want to stay rich. The best way in the world to get poor is start living rich." I couldn't do a damn thing with him. He kept on working day in and day out, warm or cold. And the thing was, he wasn't much help anymore, only he didn't seem to notice it. I was doing 9/10 of the work, and it kept me busy and worn out and tired. It was just miserable old hard, cold work, no fun to it, like loading cake and hay and feeding cattle and building fence and all kinds of winter work like that. I'd been home 3 weeks before I ever seen Molly. But then she come over to see me one day and cooked us supper, and I guess she seen right off how Dad was. I think it worried her, but she was real cheerful that day and never mentioned it to me. But she started coming over 2 or 3 times a week and cooking for us. Sometimes she even got there in time to ride a pasture with me or help me with the chores. It was real good of her to come. I was crazier about her than I had ever been. I was pretty lonesome anyway, and worn out and worried about Dad, and it was awful nice to have somebody warm like Molly to be with once in a while. But no matter what I said or how I said it, she wouldn't marry me. "I know you want me to, Gid," she said, "but it might be bad if I did. You might be sorry you ever asked me," she said. "That ain't true," I said. "I wouldn't be." She thought a minute and grinned, but a sad grin. "Then I might be," she said. "That would be just as bad." One night after Dad had gone upstairs to bed, we sat by the fireplace a while, and we got to talking about him. Molly was the best person there ever was for sitting by the fire with. Every time she came over, we got off by ourselves a little while, and those were about the only times I got unwound. "You better make him go to the doctor," she said. "If you don't, I think he's going to get real sick." "He's too damn contrary," I said. "He just won't go." "Don't talk bad about him," she said. "He's a real good man. He treats me better than anybody I know, you included." I don't know what that had to do with it, but it was true. Dad always let Molly know he thought she was about tops. "I don't reckon he'll die," I said. "You don't, do you?" She hugged me then. "He might, Gid," she said. "He's just getting sicker and sicker." I thought that over for a while, and it really scared me. I couldn't imagine Dad not being around to give the orders. Even sick, he was just as active as he could be, and never missed a thing. It was hard to think of Dad being any other way than alive. "Dad couldn't keep still long enough to die," I said. Neither one of us thought it was funny, though. "I sure am glad my Dad's healthy," she said. "I guess he'll live to be 100. If he was to die, I think I'd just plain go crazy." "I don't guess anybody lasts forever," I said. "Funny thing, I've always been sure Dad would outlive me. I just never thought of it any other way." We sat for a long time thinking about it, but I couldn't believe it would happen. I guess I knew it had to sometime, but I just couldn't believe it, not even in my brain. Well, if he'd just quit working and sit around and rest up a little, I said, I think he'd get all right. He stays on the go too much. She shook her head. That ain't his trouble. I think that's good for him. If your dad had to die, I'd want him to do it working, wouldn't you? Just to go on working till it happens. That's all he loves to do. If he was to sit around in a rocking chair, he'd get to feeling useless, and that'd be worse than being tired. I kissed her, and we sat on the couch for another hour or so. I meant to ride her home, but I was too tired, and she wouldn't let me. Much obliged, I said. Come back whenever you can. We sure are glad to see you. Why, I enjoy it, Gid, she said. Next time Dad goes off, I'll come over. When she rode off into the wind, it reminded me of Johnny up there on the plains. I missed having him around. Life is just a hard, mean business sometimes. Here we were worrying about my dad, and 3 days after we had that conversation, Molly's own dad staggered into his smokehouse drunk, looking for some whiskey, and picked up a jug of lye by mistake and drank a big swallow of it, and it killed him. He never even got out of the smokehouse. Eddie and one of his cronies was over there at the time. He had been drinking with the old man, and he went out and found him. It was a windy, dusty evening, and the first thing Molly said to me when I got there was, "Well, Gid, my poor old daddy never lived to be 100 after all," and she just about did go crazy that night. It was the end of any respect I ever had for Eddie White. I guess he was just scared of dead people. Anyhow, he sent his damn oil field crony over in the car to tell us. Dad had gone to bed, and I didn't wake him. I left a note on the kitchen table where he'd see it in the morning, and then I saddled up and got over there on the run, and when I got there, Eddie and his buddy were just driving away. I don't know where they were going in such a hurry, but they left Molly by herself with her dad, and there wasn't no excuse for that, drunk or not. I rushed in, and she was in the kitchen bawling her head off. She didn't even know Eddie was gone. The old man was dumped on a bed in his bedroom with just a quilt thrown over him. I never mentioned Eddie, and she never either. Maybe she was so torn up she forgot he had been there. She wanted me to do something for her daddy, clean him up a little, but she didn't want to go in the room with me, and I didn't want to leave her by herself for fear she'd get to taking on again. I made her drink some coffee, and I got a towel and wiped her face and kind of dried her eyes, and then we washed the dishes. There was a lot to wash. I guess she had cooked supper for Eddie and his friend. Washing them calmed her down some. When we had the kitchen good and clean, I made her hold the lamp while I went in and straightened the old man out the best I could. He looked terrible, and I didn't know a thing about what I was doing, but I got his boots off anyway, and got him wiped up some and laid out and covered up neater than he had been. It was a mistake for Molly to come. It made her sick at her stomach. She vomited in the bedroom first, and then I carried her to the bathroom and held her head while she finished emptying her stomach. She was awfully white and shaky. I walked her down to the bedroom and made her take her clothes off and put her nightgown on and get in bed, and she laid there and cried while I went back and cleaned up in the bathroom and the other bedroom. Then I left the lamp on the kitchen table and got in bed with her. She thought some people might come. She thought Eddie must have gone to tell some when she remembered him, but I didn't expect him to tell a soul that night, and he didn't. "But what will I do, Gid?" she said. "You know I can't do without Dad." "Hush, sugar," I said. "Let me just hug you tight. Let's don't talk for a while." And I did hold her. For maybe half an hour her eyes were wide open and she was stiff in the bed, but then she got warm and relaxed and her eyes shut and she was asleep. I stayed awake just about all night holding her, and she never moved or turned over till morning. She was lucky to be able to sleep, I thought. She was so helpless in a way, and when it got light and she woke up I was watching her and still holding her. I saw just as plain as day when she remembered what had happened, and I thought she would get bad again, but she never. She looked real serious, and then she pulled my head down and kissed me and got up and put up her hair standing by the bed, and she never cried at all until later that morning when Dad and the other people began to come. Chapter 15. Dad finally did go to a doctor. In fact, he went to 5 of them, but he had been right all along. They never done him no good. One of them kept him in the hospital for 2 weeks, though, and that threw every bit of the ranch work on me. It was around the 1st of April, before I got Johnny off a letter, and then I never said much. Dear Jonathan, I know you love that name so much I thought I would just use it on you. Well, how was the winter up there? I guess you have got a family of half-breed kids by now, or did that deal ever turn out? Let me know. I am sure curious. I guess the big news down here is about Molly's old man. He drunk lye last month and died. It was awful hard on Molly, but I think she is over the worst of it now. She is getting sweeter all the time, and I mean it. I think I'm going to get her in the notion of marrying me one of these days. Then when you come back, you will really know what you've missed. But I guess you will bring your Indian sweetheart home, so you won't mind too much. Eddie is acting sorrier than ever. I may have to fight him yet. Well, I wish you would come home. We could sure put you to work. We might even give you a raise. Our steers wintered good, but the calf crop is pretty puny. If we don't get some rain, the grass will all play out by June. I guess that's all the news I know of. If you see old man Grinsom, say hello for me and ask him if he thinks I can ride or not. I've got a new sorrel horse, by the way. He can fox-trot like nobody's business, but he ain't no cow horse yet. He's just a 4-year-old, though. I give $35 for him. Write me sometime and send me the news from New Mexico. Your friend, Gid. I guess old Johnny must have been sitting at the table with his pencil licked when he got my letter, because I got one from him in less than a week's time. Dear Gid, I would use the rest of your name, too, but I ain't the kind that has to get even with every mean trick that's played on me. Well, this is the life for me, and I don't mean maybe. This place I'm at is the Rancho Grande for sure. There ain't no mesquite to get in your way, but I do kind of wish it had a few more windbreaks in it. It like to blown us all away in February and March. Them was just fall breezes you got when you was up here. Jelly, she made me a big wool bandana to keep my neck warm. Jelly ain't her real name, but that's what the boss called her, so I use it too. He wasn't kidding when he said she was pretty. Boy, I never would have made it through the winter without her. Well, tell Molly I'm awful sorry about her trouble. I'm just sorry for her. I ain't going to miss the old bastard personally, are you? I wish I'd been there, though. If you do fight Eddie, don't let him get the first lick. Get the first one yourself, with a 2x4 if one's handy. I ain't losing no sleep over you and her getting married. I know she ain't that far gone. We had quite a bit of snow in early March. Never had much before that. It's all the moisture we've had. This here ain't a very big ranch, really, and it's a good thing because there's just me to take care of it. The coyotes have got 6 calves so far. I even seen one Lobo, but didn't get a shot at him. There ain't a decent horse on the place. Well, write me again. I like to hear the news. I may come home one of these days if I don't get lost in the sandstorms. Tell Molly I'll be seeing her. Your friend, Johnny. Chapter 16. We had a good rain in early February, and it looked like that would be the last we'd ever have. We never had a sprinkle in March, and by the middle of April the pastures were looking like they usually looked in July. It never helped Dad's disposition, or mine either. We had to feed the cattle, and it was such hard, hot work, Dad just couldn't do it. Between the dry weather and Dad being sick, I wasn't in a very good humor. One morning I run into Eddie. I was down in the river pasture feeding. The cattle could hear me well enough, but it was hot, and they didn't want to come to the wagon. I hollered around for an hour and only got 65 or 70. I was just about to go ahead and feed them when 3 damn floppy-eared turd hounds come loping up through the brush, barking like hell. The cattle took off in about 10 different directions. I got down and chunked the dogs and went on and got most of the cattle back together again, and I'll be damned if the dogs didn't come up and run them off again. My horse was tied to the back of the wagon, so I got on him and took my rope down and went after some dogs. I didn't rope them, but I whipped the shit out of 2 of them. The other one was too much of a dodger. When I was trotting back to the wagon, coiling my rope, I seen Eddie slouching across the flat. I might have known they was his dogs. Nobody but him had time to run hounds that time of year. He had on an old khaki jumper and some patched pants and some roughnecking boots and looked like he hadn't seen a razor in about 10 days. Both of us were mad. But I didn't start off unfriendly. "Howdy, Ed," I said. "God damn it, Fry, that ain't no way to treat dogs," he said. "No telling where they are now. I've been looking for them all morning, and now I got to do it over again." "I've been after these cattle they run off a good while myself," I said. "I guess the dogs will come home when they get hungry, won't they?" "But maybe I don't want them home," he said. "I might want to hunt some more. Listen here, I said. I don't give a plugged nickel what you want, if you're asking me. But what I want is for you and them dogs to get out of this pasture. And the next time they scare off cattle of mine, they ain't going to get off so easy. Next time they're going to get the shit jug out of them. I'm a notion to whip your butt right now, he said. I got off my horse. Have at it, I said. I hope you brought your lunch. You may need it before you're through. Oh, hell no, he said. Then I'd have to carry you to the hospital. But let me tell you, you got one coming. Write it down in your little book. Don't wait till I get too old, I said. Another thing, he said. Stay the hell away from my wife. I don't even want to see you on her place. Stay away from your what? I said. My wife, he said. Just leave her the hell alone. It was like lightning had hit me. Only not fast lightning, but a real slow bolt that slid all the way down me. By the time it got to my feet, I was plumb numb. I couldn't have said boo. Why, you look surprised, he said. I guess that shows you, now don't it? You and your long-legged buddy, too. Hell, we've been married 3 weeks, and she's a real dilly. Me and her, we really take after one another. I never had a woman so crazy about me. Well, ain't you going to congratulate me? He winked and grinned. I got back on my horse and went on back to the wagon, and he went off after his dogs. A good many of the cattle had come back, and I fed them. That afternoon, I went out with the post-hole diggers and the wire stretchers, but I didn't do no fencing. I went down to the far tank and sat under a big shade tree watching the mockingbirds and the killdeers fly around. There were a lot of bubbles on top of the water. I should have fished. I just couldn't understand Molly doing it. I wouldn't have cared if lightning had struck me. There didn't seem no reason left to work or nothing. I got to wondering if I would ever see her again, and I couldn't think what I'd say if I did. There wasn't no clouds to look at, just water and sky. So I watched the water a while, and then I watched the sky. I didn't do much thinking. I just sat there feeling tight and sick. About sundown, I rode home. Dad noticed there wasn't no dirt on my diggers, but he was tired, too, and he never said nothing about it. We had cold steak and cold potatoes for supper, and I made the coffee too weak. It wasn't such a good supper. Chapter 17. It looked like the world was going completely to pot. Dad was getting worse instead of better, and 3 or 4 days after I found out about Molly, I got another letter from Johnny. Dear Gid, well, I've got so much time to kill now, I thought I would write you again. I've been in a real scrape. It's what I get for riding sorry horses. I ought to know better. I was off riding line, and my horse buggered at a damn skunk, and off I went. Only I got caught in my rope, and he drugged me about half a mile. I guess I'm the most skinned-up person you ever saw. Besides, my hip was broke, and I was about 10 miles from home. It was a pretty hard crawl, I tell you for sure. I was out lost all one night. If it had been cold, the coyotes would have ate me by now. Jelly, she got me into town, and now they got me cemented up so I can't turn over. It's pretty tiresome, so don't ever break no hips if you can help it. The horse come in, so I ain't lost the saddle. These doctors are no count. They give me a lot of trouble. I guess it will be June before I'm worth anything again. Wish you was up here. We could play some cards and talk over old times. Write me when you get time and let me know all about Molly and your dad and what's happening down that way. I ain't had much news lately. Your friend, Johnny. So he wasn't having no luck either. I didn't know what to write him. All the news was so bad. I wished I could have gone up and stayed with him like he done with me, but it just couldn't be managed. Finally, I wrote him a note. Dear Johnny, we are all sorry to hear about your trouble. That's a cowboy's life. I would come and stay, only Dad's pretty sick now, and there ain't nobody but me to run the ranch. Molly has married Eddie. I guess that's the end of that. I haven't seen her. He is too sorry to talk about. We haven't had no rain either. I wish you would come on home when you get well. We could sure use a good hand. Your friend Gid. Dad was looking low. I would have given anything to talk to Molly about it, but the times when I could talk to her were over and gone. I did go in and see Mabel Peters a time or two. She was a nice old girl, but she wasn't much help. She was after me to marry her, and I was half a mind to. I didn't see how I could be no worse off than I was. At least we'd have somebody to do the cooking and the housework. I wanted to hire somebody, but Dad wouldn't let me. Hell no, he said. A hired woman would get the best of me in no time. We'll just get along by ourselves. One day, me and him drove a little bunch of cattle down to the League pasture. On the way back, we stopped on the ridge and talked and rested a while. It was a pretty day. The mesquite was leafed out, and everything smelled like spring. Dad had got down to pull up a devil's claw and said he didn't feel like getting back up right then. We sat under a post oak and talked. I'd got where I liked to talk to Dad. It'd taken me a long time. From where we were sitting, we could look off west and see halfway across the county, to the little ridges above Onion Creek where Dad's land ended. "I got a good ranch," he said. "That's one thing that cheers me up. The best land in the county." He was right, I guess. To me, it didn't seem like much consolation. "The nice thing is that I'm a damn sight nearer worn out than this country. I'd hate to get old in a worn-out country." "You ain't worn out," I said. "You're just damn pessimistic. If you'd stay in the hospital a while, you'd get well." He didn't say nothing for a minute. "Well, it's too bad she married him," he said, looking across the country. "She'll make a good one. But just let me tell you something, son. A woman's love is like the morning dew. It's just as apt to settle on a horse turd as it is on a rose, so you better just get over it." "Oh, I ain't hurt much," I said. "Why in the world did she want to marry a bastard like that? It just don't figure." "Well, she's got a lot of sense when it comes to taking care of herself," he said. "A lot more than you have. She'll make it." "Why, she ain't got no sense when it comes to taking care of herself," I said. Sitting on the ground, you could smell the spring coming right up through the grass and into the breeze. It was sad Dad felt so awful at such a pretty time of year. "It's my fault you don't have more," he said. "You've always had me to give you orders. I never put you on your own enough. She's been on her own since she could walk." "But there's no use in you sitting on your butt sulking," he said. "Sulking never made a dime nor kept a friend." "We better get on home," I said. By the time we got to the barn, it was late evening, and the last of the sun was shining on the weather vanes above the barn. Dad was tired. He drank some buttermilk and went to bed. He had seemed a little bit worried about me. "Anyhow, you're stubborn," he said. "Stubbornness will get a fella through a lot of mean places." The next morning, he never woke me up, and there was a note lying on the table when I come down. "Dear Gid, miserable night. There's no profit in putting up with this. I think I'll go out on the hill and turn my horses free." Or did you ever know that song? It's an old one. "Take good care of the ranch, it's a dilly. And don't trust every damn fool that comes up the road. Always work outside when you can, it's the healthiest thing. Tell Miss Molly I appreciated her coming and helping us. Just tell her much obliged until she's better paid." Well, this is the longest letter I've written in 10 years. It is too long. Be sure you get that windmill fixed. I guess you had better put in some new sucker rod. Your Dad. The rifle wasn't in the closet, so I knew that was that, and I sat down and held my head. I wished old Johnny had been there, or Molly, but they wasn't. Directly, I went outside and turned off the windmill, and went on down to the barn and hitched the wagon and put the wagon sheet in it, and headed off across the hill. He was right on the west side. He had on a clean khaki shirt and Levi's and had taken his hat off, and was laying on his back on the grass. Once I seen him, I wasn't so scared for some reason. He just looked natural, like Dad, and comfortable. I put him in the wagon and took him up to the house and laid him on the couch in the living room and got a counterpane to cover him with. It was worse in that cool, darkish, dusty old living room than it had been out in the sunshine. I hated to be the one to start treating Dad like a dead person. It was a long time before he seemed dead to me. For 3 months after that, I would wonder in the morning why he hadn't come to wake me up. I guess Dad had been better known than I thought. There was a big funeral and a lot of talk about what a pioneer he had been. It never done him much good, or me either. The worst of it all was seeing Molly. After I went into town to the undertaker, a lot of people came out to visit me and bring stuff to eat. Molly, she came too and brought a cake, and it was so awkward I got a headache from it. I knew she was remembering when her dad died and wishing she could really help me, but she couldn't. All those people were there trying to cheer me up, and it just made me bluer. Every once in a while, I would see Molly looking at me from across the room, and she would be crying and looking so sad I wished I could have gone over and hugged her and told her it was okay. Finally, I did talk to her just a minute. "Molly," I said, "one of the last things Dad did was tell me to thank you for helping us last winter. He sure appreciated it." "I hope you'll come and see me sometime, Gid," she said, "when all of this is over." Right after that, she left. I seen her at the funeral, but just at a distance. Eddie was even there. I guess old Johnny was the only one that wasn't. I wrote him a card and told him a little about it, but he never answered. In September, after he was back, we had a kind of little funeral ourselves. We took Dad's old white saddle horse that he called Snowman out on the hill and let him loose in the pasture. Nobody ever rode him again. We left Dad's saddle hanging in the harness shed. Sometimes when I'm doing the chores early in the mornings, I wonder if Dad and that old pony aren't still out there, maybe, slipping around through the misty pastures and checking up on the new calves. Chapter 18. One afternoon, about 10 days after Dad died, I decided I ought to look over the ranch. Of course, I had been over every inch of it 100 times, but it had been Dad's ranch then and not mine. It was a nice sunny day with a few white clouds in the sky and not too hot. The week Dad killed himself, we had a 2-inch rain. It was just his luck to miss it, and the country looked wonderful. We had lots of grass, and the weeds weren't too bad yet. Dad had about 10,000 acres. He had the whole county to pick from, and he picked careful. There was a creek to the southeast and a creek to the northwest, and the river down the middle. So if there was water anywhere in the country, we had it.